Welcome to another broadcast from mindyourhealthcast.com. This time I want to do some preparatory type informational disclosure. These are some pieces of information that along the way I have put out in other broadcasts, but not brought them together in the same way that this particular broadcast is. And I guess if you gave it a title, it would be, Are You Programmed for Sickness? And I think it's a good question to ask because having grown up many years ago, and still growing, I realize that there's been tremendous changes in the attitude of the health profession, and in particular I'm talking about medicine in the early days, and the public about the subject of sickness. Now, when I was young, few people went to doctors. They generally would be more inclined to go if they had an injury of some sort. A lot of people when I was young worked on farms and handled a lot of machinery and equipment, and or were loggers and did a lot of work of cutting and trimming trees and transporting trees and sawmill work with trees. And so being around lots of dangerous equipment, occasionally people were injured. And of course, sometimes people would fall and break an arm or in some kind of labor injure or break a leg. So I would say that more often people would go for traumatic events. And of course, the old doctor was trained in everything. And they had their own x-ray because there were no imaging facilities around. And they had to know how to set bones, and they had to know how to do emergency surgeries and to suture cuts and abrasions and wounds of various sorts. They took care of the wives and mothers in childbirth as well as pregnancy. They handled people who were stressed or distressed or grieving or depressed, and pretty much were tuned in to all the things related to the body. But they were still not overloaded because it was not a major practice to go in for routine checkups or go in to have laboratory work done, because generally there were no laboratories available except in very large cities, and even if there were, the tests that were available were minimal compared to today. So, in light of all that, people still fared fairly well. But as time has progressed, our world became more toxic, stress increased, our diet became poorer, the fast food restaurants came along, the soil became depleted, the commercial growers went more and more to processing and making imitation and synthetic foods, and that the drug manufacturers pumped out more and more drugs. It became important to make people feel that to be normal you were going to be sick. When I was young, people normally were well unless something unusual happened. They weren't sick that often. And I remember that. In the little town I lived in, I've probably mentioned this before, I remember one heart problem person who had been born with a heart defect. I remember one cancer case. I remember very few, quote, heart attacks. And those were usually in late age. Never heard of type 2 diabetes. There was hardly anybody with type 1 diabetes. No one was overweight. It was a real exception. I know in my class in school there was one person in there that was on the heavier side. But generally everybody was thin and trim. Everybody was active. They felt good. They had lots of energy. And so things have changed tremendously. Now it appears that to be normal is to be sick, to be healthy is an exception. And so as I've watched what's happened, I've watched the increase in advertising. When I was young, of course there was radio until I was much older, and then TV came along when I was, well, at least it came to us when I was about 14. Some of the big cities had it first, but the signals weren't powerful enough, and the receivers powerful enough, and the antenna systems, and there were no cable and all of that, so it was a different ball game. But the ads that we had on the radio basically were over-the-counter type things for colds and flus, and I remember the Doan's pills and the various types of over-the-counter things that people bought occasionally. And one was still interesting to me, Carter's Little Liver Pills. And there wasn't a lot out there. And there was a few cough medicines on the market, and other than that, aspirin, of course, came early, and it was around, but all this stuff was over the counter. There weren't very many prescriptions, and if you went to a doctor, you didn't have drugstores on every corner, and you didn't have a doctor writing piles of prescriptions. More often, either he gave you nothing, or he may give you some patent or over-the-counter product out of his office, or tell you to stop by the one or two little drugstores that were in town and pick up something. If you were constipated, he might tell you to go pick up a bottle of citrate of magnesia, which is magnesium citrate. So it's just a totally different ball game. But then, as time went on, we had the advent of the food processors in commercial growing. We had people who moved into the cities and had to buy all their food. We had the whole advent of the food market period. And we had, as I say, still, it was a long time before all the fast food places came along. The advertising was very skimpy on, that was my whole point. The advertising was very skimpy on drugs. Now everything has changed tremendously, and the ads, I mean, you can't watch any program without anywhere from a half a dozen or more ads on medications or drugs to go ask your doctor about. There's occasionally some over-the-counter stuff, but more often it's prescription drugs. Well, go and ask your doctor if this is right for you. And so a whole new ball game of big-time pharmacy and big-time food processing and growing. And so in the meantime, it seems that more often that's what people think about, is being sick, and the fear that if something happened they couldn't get their sick care. And I know that I've studied a lot of psychology, I've studied a lot of mind programming and how you can make change in people, how you can promote products, and the big advertising agencies, of course, are very well trained in all of that. And so I've seen all these ads come out, I see how they work, I understand the principles in the background. So what this broadcast is about is giving you some good information about discerning what's going on and understanding the process and being able to see through the way these commercials are presented. Now, to preface all of this, you really need to get a very good book written by someone that I've been following his work for years. He originally was in the business of lie detection, did it for years, and then he began to expand into other areas, and he began to utilize what he had learned along the way in a beneficial and positive way. But he wrote a book in recent years called Mind Programming. The author's name is Eldon Taylor, and he basically is giving you a real brief education in the concept of mind programming. Now, see, that's been around a long time, but for many years nobody even they were not aware of it, and they never talked about it. But he kind of enlightens you of what is mind programming, and then he tells you how it can be misused. And in particular, he talks about whether it be military uses or whether it be advertising uses or whatever. He basically tells you about the misuse of it, how you can influence people, how you can make changes, and not necessarily for the better, but for the better of the person who's producing the ad. And the big thing about it is that the third part of his book tells you how you can make use of those principles on your own to better yourself. In other words, it's not that the programming is bad, it's the intent behind it. So therefore, if you wanted to improve yourself, you wanted to break a bad habit, or you wanted to improve your concentration, your focus, your memory, there's lots of good things. Improve your health, improve your weight, whatever it is you want to do, quit smoking. Those things, you can make use of these principles in a good, positive way. And so he's produced a lot of material. If you go to my website on resources and so forth, there is a link that will go to his website, and he carries a lot of books. He carries a lot of recordings, specialized recordings. He's developed a very unique type of recording that he calls self-talk, basically. That's what it gets down to. And he's created these subliminals, which is part of the programming process we're talking about. And subliminals basically carry some music or sound that relaxes you, and then below the normal hearing level, there is positive suggestions, affirmations, that will help program you to improve what you want to improve. Now, he also includes the text along with it, what's there. And these are basically sound recordings. I think he has a few video. But anyhow, this is good material and the positive use of mind programming. But of course, what I'm talking about more today is how it can be used, in my mind, in a negative way to convince you that you need some pill or some service, and convince you that there's something wrong with you, that you better go get it. And most of the programming is either going to be consciously induced, meaning you're aware that it's happening, or it's going to be unconscious, which means you're being influenced, but you're not aware that you are being influenced. And I'm not saying it's just done by the pharmaceuticals, it's done by the food companies, and it's done by and for other products. But it's very, very skillfully done, and the principles are laid out. As I say, he talks about pretty much all of them in his book, and it's something that you should be aware of. So when you hear a commercial, you can kind of glean through it and say, gee, is this good or is it not good? And based on the merits, and I'm not saying everything that's advertised is bad, but I'm saying your choice to purchase or not to purchase it should be based on your conscious awareness of the merits and demerits of a product, and therefore you make a conscious decision, not being skillfully guided into purchasing things that you don't really need or want. So some of the methods that are used, I think it's very important that you consider those, have to do with the way the material is set up. And as I say, these appeal on all these different levels. One of the big things they do are repetition. Now, you have probably noticed that a lot of times, if it bugs you, you keep hearing the same name of the product over and over. And many times they'll say it 2 and 3 times in a row, or then they'll show you some pictures or some other things will happen, and then they'll repeat it again and again. Now that's what's being done on a conscious level, and that alone, if repeated often enough, comes back from autosuggestion, which we've talked about before, which was developed many years ago out of France by a French pharmacist, actually, by the name of Emile Coué. And it was called autosuggestion. Every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. And huge amount of people just every day consciously repeating those phrases found things improving in their life and found their health improving and found their anxiety being reduced and so forth. So it can be utilized, as I say, in a positive way, but the use of repetition in an ad, whether at the conscious level or the subliminal, which means below the sound level, that means you consciously are not aware of it, but there's a part of your brain that's still hearing it. And that's what makes it be subliminal. But anyhow, it can be repeated also subliminally over and over, and you aren't aware, but then the next time you go out or you go to the store or you pay attention to, gee, I have that symptom and I have this symptom, maybe something's wrong with me, maybe I better see the doctor. And in some cases, it's a specific product. Well, if you think you need this pill, then see your doctor and find out if it's right for you. Unfortunately, in many cases, the doctors aren't much aware of it or any more than you. I've had patients come in who found that they knew more about a particular medication or problem than the doctor they went to see. So that's easy to be because they don't have time to sit and watch all those programs and get all the programming themselves. And basically what they know is what the detail people from the pharmaceuticals come around and tell them, well, here's the latest drug for heartburn, and so here is, it's going to replace this one and this one and this one, and this is the latest, this is the most potent, blah, blah, blah. And the only problem is you probably shouldn't prescribe it if they have or are doing such and such. And that pretty much would be their knowledge, unless you have a very conscientious doctor who really, really wants to know, and then he may well look more into it, or he may read the paper that comes with it. You know, they have these sheets that tell you all of the detail sheets that tell you all about the drug, what it's made from, what the supposed method of action is in the body. In many cases, you'll actually find it doesn't know. They'll say, well, method of action is unknown. We don't really know exactly why it does what it does, but here's what the result is we seem to get with it. And then, of course, it'll have a list of all the adverse effects or contraindications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in a busy practice, if a doctor is seeing a person every 5 to 10 minutes and he's being handed a stack of detail sheets on all these drugs that keep popping up, because at any given time there's about 15,000 circulating in use each month. Some are pulled off, new ones are added, but on the average it's about 15,000. And it's funny because at one time I thought, well, I'll subscribe to one of these loose leaf drug services so I can kind of keep up with what's going on in the drug market. I couldn't even keep up with changing the pages every month. The manual was this thick, and a stack of replacement pages like that, and these were thin pages, they weren't regular thick pages. That was coming out every month, and I thought, gee, I don't have time to sit and exchange all these pages every month. So I just finally let the subscription go. And the doctor, the average doctor isn't going to have time to do all that. So he's basically going to work from the information given to him by the detail person who represents the pharmaceutical that is marketing a particular drug. But TV has helped a lot as far as drawing people in for the doctors, because here they say, well, if you have this and this and this, then this is what you need, but see your doctor to see if it's right for you. And so, of course, the doctors don't mind that too bad, because when you come in, you say, gee, I'd like this burgundy pill, and then he's not going to say, well, no, I'm not going to give you that. So in his mind, he's thinking, wow, this is an easy visit. He writes you out a prescription, you're out the door, and nothing to it. Unless there's some major contraindication, he may say, well, do you have or have you had this problem? then of course if he's paying attention at all, then you're going to get your prescription. Now, the pharmacist is going to be a little more detailed about that. If you go in, he's going to ask you what other medications are you taking and any other key questions. He's going to plug it in a computer and it's going to come out and say, no, you can't take this drug with that drug. It could be fatal. And so he's not going to come back and tell you very often that, no, don't take that drug, it's fatal. He's going to get on the phone to the doctor and say, are you sure you want to prescribe this drug to this patient? And so many times he saves the doctor a lot of grief. And then he can go back to the person and say, oh, I've just been in contact with your doctor and he's decided this is what you should have. And he's going to save the doctor and himself a lot of problems. And you, of course, some big problems sometimes, because there are some cases where the interaction between two drugs could be fatal. And however, you were taken to the doctor's office by the advertising. And so that's the whole purpose of what I'm getting at, is that you've been programmed at a conscious level. But see, I know that there's more to those ads than just the information at the top, the repeating of the name of the drug. But sometimes that could be enough, because if you happen to have one or more of those major things they're talking about, that may be enough. But underneath, you also can be programmed with something called entrainment. Entrainment means that there are certain sound frequencies or visual frequencies, meaning blinking light, and it's usually fast enough that you might not necessarily be aware of it, and especially the sound. It can be embedded in such a way that you wouldn't know it's there, but when your brain is exposed to a particular frequency called an entrainment frequency, it locks your brain onto that frequency. And most people, now some people are able to avoid that, but in most people their brain's going to be locked into it. And so what they're going to do is they're going to have themselves put into a state of mind where the ad is really going to impact them. I mean, it's almost like it's their idea because of the entrainment. Now, there's a lot of ways that that's used, and it's beyond what we're talking about today to go further, other than to say it can be utilized in advertising, but as I say, both visually and in the frequencies. Also, there's a great appeal to the emotions, and the emotions are very powerful drivers. I studied the work of a master salesperson named J. Douglas Edwards many years ago, became very fabulously rich as a real estate broker, and then went into training of sales. And he's the one that made the comment, buying is basically an emotional experience. You don't logically, in most cases, make a decision. You make an emotional decision. There's something about it that appeals to you emotionally. And so a lot of times when they do these ads, they're using just the right music. It may be low level, but nonetheless, it's there to appeal to your emotions, and the content of the ad can be such as to appeal to your emotions and draw you into wanting to buy something, or wanting to at least go look into whether you want to buy it. And then there's the subliminals, as I mentioned earlier, those that are below awareness is what it amounts to. It's in the background, and a part of your brain is picking it up, but you consciously are not aware that's happening. And those can be visuals. They can be flashed in between, what do I want to say, like frames. They can be flashed in between frames, but you wouldn't see it. If you were to say, did you notice anything, you could say, gee, no, I didn't see anything. Well, but they could be written statements actually flashed between frames, and your mind's picking them up. But it's so fast that you consciously are not aware of it. It goes between your conscious capabilities to actually visualize it consciously. But they're there, and you could throw those in. The average video, for example, is running at 30 frames per second. Okay, if you threw in the middle of 30 frames a written statement, go by blankety blank, you wouldn't see it, but it would be being recorded in the unconscious mind. Also, they can even embed within the image itself certain images that you don't notice when you look at it. But the image nonetheless is there, and nonetheless it has impact. Or it could be subliminal voice, or it could be a combination of all of those things. And so you might find that, as I say, suddenly you're being moved in a certain direction to go do something, buy something, look at something, or say something, or whatever. And you're thinking to yourself, where did that come from? All of a sudden you feel this move. Now the next one I'm going to mention is really profound. I know this from information, different sources, let's put it that way. But I know one source was a sound engineer that way back in the 50s, they found that while a recording was being made and you could sit next to it and by intent you could put a thought into it, that would not be non-detectable. Now most of the stuff I've been talking about, if you had the right equipment and knew what you were looking for, you could find it. But this one you can't find. At least at this point, I don't know of any way you can find it. But William Tiller, the physicist, and if you remember from my last broadcasts on quantum physics or quantum mechanics, that we mentioned William Tiller, who wrote a book called Science and Human Transformation and Conscious Acts of Creation, that you, by intent, can alter something matter-wise. For example, you can imprint a thought on a memory chip, an electronic chip. If you can hold that thought and intend to put it there, it can be put on there, and he's proven it. He's proven that you can then change things in the environment of that chip by what you had encoded on that chip. So there is such a thing as the thought imprinting. And it was interesting because years ago, when they discovered this, they could put it in a recording and then they could put the thought to go buy this recording. And so when somebody listened to it, they picked that up and they felt a move to go buy it. And or other things, it could affect your behavior, or it could even cause you to develop fear and paranoia if you want to stir up a group of people to incite a riot or to do other strange behaviors. It would be possible to do that with thought imprinting in a recording. And as I say, this one a lot of people have never heard of, and I'm sure many people are going to say, well, that couldn't be true. But if you read Dr. Tiller's 2 books, you'll see that intent, a thought, can be imprinted. And so I am convinced that without a doubt it's put in these commercials, and many of them, and nobody is going to be able to detect it. At least I don't know of a way at this point that you could detect it other than effects. And with Tiller, that's what would happen. You imprint a chip, and then you could have whatever you printed there affect the surrounding material, like water. You could change the pH of water by a whole degree, which is like 100 times from 1 pH, like 6 to 7, would be almost 100 times more change in the hydrogen ion concentration. And so you could shift the pH. You could do other things in terms of influencing matter. So if you can do that, you can certainly influence your behavior with the right thought implanted in. So, out of all of that, in my mind, we come up with some explanation of placebo and nocebo, which we've talked about before. Now, if you remember that placebo means getting an effect because you think you will get that effect, or you believe it. It's more than thinking. You actually believe that it's going to work. And there's been evidence of tumors disappearing because a person thought that what they took was going to get rid of it, when in fact it had already been shown that it did not have effect, but that person believed it did. On the other hand, there's a nocebo effect, because the one case that I mentioned way back along the way, I don't know if you recall, this person took this experimental substance, an injection of it, and his tumors literally melted away in 2 or 3 days and were gone. But then, after he got out of the hospital and went home, he saw an article in the paper that said, well, now there's a question as to whether it works or not, and his tumor started coming back. And then he went back to the hospital, and the doctor gave him another injection of what he said was a better one, because he said, well, you know, the other batch, there was some that was too old and it was not very effective. And so, but wait, I have some fresh, potent, new stuff. And he gave him an injection. The tumors all shrunk and disappeared. The guy went home. And then a period of time transpired, and there was a final big article and news release that final studies show that this product was totally worthless, and his tumors came back with a vengeance, and he died. So that's nocebo, meaning getting sick from what you believe. And what you believe sometimes isn't always what you started out with, but something that's been implanted in you. Nonetheless, the body effect and the mind effect are very potent. Now, I've mentioned before, I have a notebook full of material that goes back 3,000 years of how it was known 3,000 years ago and over the period of 3,000 years that of the tremendous power of the body-mind. So that is one way it can cause a problem. Now, there was a case that came up a while back. It's probably been 2, 3, 4 years, maybe even longer now. Time goes by pretty rapidly anymore, it seems. And in this case, there was a ballpark and there was a game going on. And suddenly somebody who was in attendance there suddenly became deathly sick and started vomiting like crazy and just felt awful. And so they called the emergency people. They came along and they said, well, you know, what have you been doing for a while? He said, well, the only thing I've done is I drank some water from this water fountain. So to be safe, the authorities got on the loudspeaker and announced that they had a case where somebody had gotten deathly sick after drinking this water, so don't anyone go drink out of this particular fountain. Immediately, several dozen people who were in that section and had taken some water from that fountain recently suddenly became very nauseated and were vomiting, extremely sick, had to be taken to the hospital. And once there, of course, it was found out that this particular person had something that had nothing to do with the water, and that they had tested the water and there was nothing wrong with it. But yet they were just as sick as he was because they believed that that fountain must have been contaminated and they drank out of it. So just to show you the power of belief and, and how it can physically affect you. And so, as I say, that's a negative side of this, but the fact is that when people believe certain things, they can get really sick out of it. And so, in my mind, I think it's unscrupulous that ads can be done like that. Now, I'm giving you my opinion. You don't have to believe it, but I've been around a long time and I am familiar with a wide variety of information, things that I wouldn't even want to be talking about over the video. But I think that they are using the commercials to cause you to feel like you need something and go do something about it. And there's one in particular that really hit me, and it made use of pretty much all these things. And you probably have seen it, but it was well done. I have to say that whoever the agency was that prepared this commercial, they knew how to hit from all these things that we've been talking about, except I don't know about the thought implanting, but it would not surprise me. And it's something they're not going to admit to and you're not going to hear about. I just know it from other sources, and I know that it does work. So anyhow, this commercial starts out by this. First of all, it's in black and white gray tones. And black and white gray tones, it has that kind of a depressing, dismal, emotional effect. And so this guy comes on, and he's sitting turned a little bit with his head down. He's wearing glasses, and he has this very somber look on his face. And he says, I got caught blindsided. And, he kind of looks up at the camera sideways. I got blindsided, and I'm telling you this because I don't want the same thing to happen to you. Now, boy, there's a strong emotional pill. Now, here's a guy who's very intense, who's very intent, and he's wanting you to be sure that you don't have the same problem he had because he wasn't paying attention, and now he's bringing it to your attention. So then they throw in a bunch of repeated phrases about this particular drug. But in the process, things are changing. Now the background suddenly comes up, and here is this man smiling, and his family with him smiling. They're out in the country, green grass, cows grazing in the pasture, trees in the background, a nice split wood fence along this country road, and he's saying how great he feels and how great everything is because he took this drug. And of course, as I say, numerous times during this commercial, they have repeated over and over. They've done emotional appeal. I mean, you would almost want to take the drug even if you didn't think you needed it, because look how it changed his life. And he's only doing this because he doesn't want you to be in danger, because he had this heart attack because he wasn't taking the drug to begin with. And now he's okay, and he doesn't have to worry anymore, and things are great, and they can all live their life and live happily ever after, and the world is bright and sunshiny, and so forth. And it got you out of this gray, dismal background with this very somber look. And so here's a case where they've used pretty much all of these ideas and have talked you into, buying this. You better go see your doctor about this. And especially this brand, because there's other brands out there, but it was this brand that really helped this guy. And that's the one you should be taking. And so you're going to go to your doctor and say, well, gee, my cholesterol is up a little. Do you think I should be taking so-and-so? So at any rate, they make use of all these things, and they repeat, as I say, over and over in the commercial. You're going to hear it numerous times. And of course, the interesting thing is there are some aspects of the drug they don't want you to think much about. And so they're extremely good, because in that commercial at some point you hear this voice in the background, or you see in kind of small print at the bottom of the ad some alert or warning about the drug. But how are you going to be paying attention to that when you're seeing how great this guy's life is because he's now taking this drug, and how happy he and his family are, and how great the world is because he's taking it? And then they come in and say, well, however, blah, 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 blah. And they usually drop their voice way down so that it's much, much lower than the normal sound of the ad. And then very rapid monotone, no inflection at all. It's like this, there's a little side note, but, it's really not that important, because we're not going to throw it up in big letters on the screen and flash lights around it and say, alert, 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 alert. We're going to say, well, you could have a heart attack, you could have a stroke, you could die, it could destroy your liver, and, don't worry about that. I mean, that's what it implies. That this is not important. What's important is that you can have this happy, carefree life if you just take this drug. And so, interestingly, it works extremely well. And then, of course, as I say, they keep repeating over and over all of these benefits, of all these good things that happen in your life. And they choose their words well, too, because, there's been some studies that say probably somewhere between 3 and 7% of communication is not the words themselves, it's the context, the inflection, the way you say it, your body posture, all these implied things are really what communicates. It's not just the words. But when the words are used, they're very carefully chosen. For example, you get the common cold. So everybody gets a cold. It's common. So, it's okay, but if you want to feel better, here you can take this drug. Or things like the common headache or backache. But when you take this, you're going to get speedy relief. Now, I didn't mention it, but when you choose words, there's what are called honorific words that everybody is positive toward, in favor of, and there are pejorative words that carry with it very negative emotional intent or feeling that comes along with it. So pejorative words, years ago they used to say, there were people that had mixed heritage. They came from two different races or two different social levels or whatever. But especially in races is when it was used, and especially with American Indians, unfortunately. But they would say, they didn't say if an Indian person married a non-Indian, they didn't say that they had a mixed heritage, which is pretty neutral. They said they were half-breeds. Now, half-breed immediately carries with it a very strong negative or pejorative emotional feeling. So words do carry emotional states depending on the word. So in these type of cases, when they're pushing the benefits of something, they're going to use honorific words, ones that carry, like apple pie and baseball, and words that tend to bring out the better side of feeling in people that everybody's in favor of. A day on the beach, everybody's in favor of a day on the beach, but not too many people would be favorable to a day in a major hurricane. That wouldn't be so much fun. And so they use this like speedy relief. Well, you may have a headache, you may have this, you may have that, but you can get speedy relief. And so that makes you drawn toward the product. And of course then many times they hit the commercials over and over a period of time so that they keep banging you with it. And then you hear about, and I'm saying this to say that all of this in combination, all of these commercials, all of these newspaper and magazine articles and ads, and all of the newscasts that talk about the latest breakthroughs in drugs. I would say that's another one of the big honorific terms. We have a breakthrough, or we have an impending breakthrough. Please donate your money because this shows strong promise. The word promise, oh wow, there's some strong promise that we have a breakthrough almost on this particular approach to cancer or whatever. But in the meantime, we need more money for research and so forth. But we're close to a breakthrough. So we get news releases every year just before they're going to go on a campaign to raise money. So they, over and over, we hear all this. We hear the health crisis. We hear about sickness and relief from sickness. We see billboards with all this stuff on it. And we hear terms like screening. Well, now, you need to get into your doctor and be screened for osteoporosis or for whatever. Or you need to go ask your doctor. Let him tell you, maybe you should get this blood test, or maybe you should get this MRI or the CT scan or whatever. And then, of course, the doctors always schedule the routine checkups to kind of bring you back in and keep your mind on illness and sickness. And I'm not saying that people don't ever get sick, and I'm not saying that there's not a time when somebody might need a particular surgery, or they're in a bad accident, or they're going to need it repaired and treated and taken care of. I'm not negative to all those things. What I'm saying is that it's almost like there's an obsession has developed in this country. And as proof of that, just be aware that at 50% of the drugs manufactured and taken in the world are taken in the U.S. And also be aware that the U.S. is the only country that allows public advertising on TV, radio, and so forth of drugs direct to the public. See, it used to be you didn't see those. You didn't see these prescription drugs. What would happen is that you would go to your doctor if you were sick, and then he could prescribe you something, but the drug companies were not going direct on TV and radio and all the commercial advertising like that. It was, if there was a magazine article, it was in a drug or a doctor's magazine or journal. That's where the drug ads were. But now, in this country, they've upped the ante tremendously by going direct to the public. And so it's all a part of this sickness programming. We want everybody to feel like they get sick a lot and they need a lot of help. And therefore, they need our products. And so they create the need, and then the next thing you know, I've watched several diseases come into being over the years that never existed before, because part of the problem of merchandising your product is to have people believe that there is a problem or a crisis that needs attention, until the people are saying, wow, what are we going to do? Then they're going to come out with the solution to your problem, excuse me, which happens to be this particular product. Now, of course, we know that in the final picture, they're not saying it's going to cure your problem. In fact, you can notice skillfully and carefully that none of the ads say they're going to cure anything, because the products aren't designed to cure anything. They're designed to make you feel more comfortable, and they're designed to relieve your anxiety, but they certainly are going to only manage your symptom at most, and know that you're going to be back for more because they haven't solved anything. And it's not so important that we know why you're sick, only that we know you're sick, and here's what your symptoms are, and here's what we have available to give you speedy relief. And so it's become, as I say, like a national obsession with sickness. So everybody is in fear, everybody's in panic that if they can't have their health supply available, or they call it health supply, it's really sickness supply, can't have it available, we're in big trouble. And I've watched this happen. I watched a relatively happy country of people who were relatively healthy over the years get sicker and sicker, so that every time you turn around, you're being bombarded with some kind of a message telling you why you need to have this product. And as I say, those messages are loaded. And I think, again, what I mentioned at the beginning, you would do well to get Eldon Taylor's book and read about mind programming and kind of educate yourself. Now, there's other material out there too, but that is a good starting point, because it's made to simplify the whole concept, what it is. And I don't know that he's going to tell you everything I said, but he's going to tell you a lot of things that at least get you tuned in, because the whole thing is that you should be making the decisions. You shouldn't have them being made for you and programmed into your mind so that you feel a compulsion to go do it. And you shouldn't expect to be sick all the time, although we do have a lot of stresses in our society. We do have a lot of contamination and toxins that have accumulated over the years, and we do have a lot of nutritional deficiencies. But that's another story and for another time. But next broadcast, it's not exactly a continuation of this, but it is showing you how the profession as a whole is utilizing all of this to further the medical business. And I hope you don't think that I'm trying to say that every doctor's bad. Most of them aren't. There's unscrupulous people in the regular medical profession. There's unscrupulous people in the natural profession. Any place there's a dollar to be made, there's going to be some unscrupulous people come along and take advantage of people. So that happens, and that is what I'm not very happy about, are those type of things. But the big thing is you're the consumer, and as a consumer, you need to be aware of what's going on, and you need to be able to discern so that you can be educated and know, well, gee, I'm not so happy with this. I think I need to seek other opinion and other advice first before I get into some drug that could destroy my liver, or it could give me a stroke. And I was just going to throw in real fast, one of the drugs that they advertised had to do with runny nose and burny eyes and watery eyes. And they tout all the great things about it, and people are smiling, now I can go out because things aren't going to bother me and blah, blah, blah. But then in the meantime, in a low-tone voice, monotone, very rapidly, however, if you take this drug, many have experienced blood clots, strokes, heart attacks, and death. That's the price you may have to pay to have a nose that's not dripping and an eye that's not watering. And so we've come to the end of another broadcast. I want you to go to the website if you feel so inclined. And look, we keep adding things here and there. We add new books. We add other things that I feel that I've looked at and utilized that feel that are very good to keep you healthy. And that's what we want to do. So until the next broadcast from mindyourhealthcast.com, be healthy.